All right. Well, I am Marc Korman. I am one of the state delegates representing all of you in District 16. And because of the timing of this town hall, welcome to the one and only one of these that I will ever MC, because this is normally the job of our state senator. But as we'll discuss, we don't currently have a state senator. A lot of you have been on these before, but I think we'll each, the three of us, Delegate Love, Delegate Wolek, and myself will give some introductory remarks and then take your questions. We'll use the chat for the questions. So type your question in the chat, and then we'll go through and farm out to the appropriate member. And of course, I'm really excited to be joined by my two colleagues, my seatmates. First, Delegate Love. I will say, I've obviously served with Delegate Love for a few years now, but this year we were serving on the same committee. I was the chair of the committee. She was a subcommittee chair, and I saw up close how she works diligently through difficult problems. And she also brings that not only to her subcommittee's work, but her own legislative agenda, and achieved some huge successes this year that I know she'll talk about, including a landmark data privacy law that she's worked on in a way her entire life, but certainly her entire time in Annapolis. And of course, Delegate Sara Wolek. This was her first full session with us. She joined for the last week of the 2023 legislative session, so she was with us all of 2024, and despite being relatively new, found great legislative success, in particular in supporting some communities that really need our attention. That she'll talk about how the special needs community can access certain state scholarships, and how seniors can use what are called village services, these helping neighbor networks that she can talk to you about. And she's also serving on the Appropriations Committee, which is my old stomping ground, so I feel very comfortable knowing District 16 still has a great voice there, taking care of our district. As I said, we don't currently have a senator. That's because Senator Ariana Kelly, who's been a passionate advocate for the district since she was first elected to the House of Delegates in 2010 and then moved over to the state Senate last year, resigned at the end of the session to join the Moore administration in a new role, which is obviously great news for her. It's great that we are sort of a farm team for the executive branch, with both Senator Lee last year and now Senator Kelly being called up. There's, of course, a process to replace Ariana. The only candidate engaged in that process is our own Sara Love. So great news. She's going to be, once the process plays out, our new state senator. But just to briefly explain that, June 3rd is the date by which our local party committee has to send to the governor a list of names, which can be one name, of their recommendation of who should replace, who should become our District 16 senator. So June 3rd is the date for that process. Assuming everything goes as it will, we will, of course, then have a delegate vacancy, and the party committee will announce the timeline for filling that vacancy as well. So keep an eye out for that if you are interested. And I know there's a lot of interest in whether that's sort of the right policy that we do these appointments or not. I'll just share my own opinion. The delegates, my colleagues, can share their opinion. I served on the Central Committee for 7 years. Did about 7 appointments during that time. And while I think we made some good picks, including, District 16's Bill Frick, for example, or Karen Brito, I think we could have a better process. And I think some of the ideas that have been circulated to, for example, say if there's a vacancy in the first year and a half of the term, you could have a special election at the presidential election. To me, that makes a lot of sense. So I know a lot of folks who want to continue to work towards that kind of reform. So just shifting to my own sort of remarks here, when I speak to groups after most sessions, I usually feel like I have a theme to point to for that session. It was the session of COVID or COVID recovery or a new governor. And this year, I feel like it was a little bit more varied week to week as to what the major driving issue was. One week, it felt like it was public safety. The next week, the budget. Obviously, the tragedy at the Key Bridge occurred. And so that, became the issue of a week. Some weeks it was housing and renters issues. One week it felt like everything was about energy and reforming our retail energy market and our wind energy laws. So felt like we covered a lot of ground. For me as an individual, I was in a new role this legislative session, serving as the chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee, one of 6 standing committees in the House of Delegates. As I said, I joined Delegate Love on that committee, and it was an incredible amount of work and a real challenge, but also a really great opportunity. And of course, it's a role of leadership of the whole House and for the whole state. But I know where I'm from, and so I always made sure that I kept an eye out for what was important to District 16 in that role, and I'll give a few examples. One of the biggest pieces of legislation we had was one of the governor's bills related to housing. The governor declared that this was the housing session, and he had a package of 3 bills, and of course, a lot of my colleagues had other bills dealing with housing issues, really important issues related to tenant safety for rental housing, a bill related to financing, how we finance housing and also commercial development, taking advantage of some federal tax programs. And then he had a bill related to zoning and density, which can be quite controversial. And we revised that bill through the committee process to make sure that, yes, we want to incentivize, increased housing in some areas, but we also want to leave some decisions to the locals. And so we removed from the governor's bill changes to the single family home zoning in our communities and said that's the proper role of the county council in the state of Maryland. And so we thought that was sort of most consistent with what a lot of our suburban areas wanted, but I know that was consistent with sort of District 16's interest. And so we made sure that that bill was amended in a way that made sense for District 16. One of our colleagues, Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr, had a really important bill related to Vision Zero, which is this concept of reducing, it's an aspirational goal of reducing our roadway deaths to zero. And that includes auto crashes, but also cyclist and pedestrian crashes as well. Cyclists and pedestrians, thankfully we have fewer crashes, but they're particularly vulnerable. When one car hits another car, it can end in tragic circumstances. But when one car hits a cyclist or a pedestrian, it almost always ends in tragic circumstances, right? Like there's very, very little margin for error there. So we have, as both a county goal and a state goal, Vision Zero, but of course we need to do things to actually put that into action. And Delegate Polakovich-Carr's idea was to create sort of a council to make sure that they were meeting at a state level, working on Vision Zero. And so we amended that bill in the committee to give it a little bit of teeth and say, not only does this council have to meet and talk, but anytime there's an incident like this, State Highway has to do what's called an infrastructure review when it involves a state roadway. And we said, not only is this council going to have to hear about these infrastructure reviews, they're going to have to vote to accept them, which means they're going to have the opportunity to ask State Highway questions about them to figure out and make sure that we're actually getting to the root cause of problems and coming up with recommendations to solve those problems, not all of which can be solved overnight, right? We don't have the resources or even the physical space to put a sidewalk along every state highway, for example, but we at least need to be talking about those things and giving this council the teeth to actually have to vote on these infrastructure reviews to make them actually do their due diligence, I think is going to be really important to advancing this Vision Zero goal that I think a lot of us share. And we also require those meetings to be web streamed for all of you at home. If you're interested, for example, if there was a crash along River Road, which of course we know last year there was a fatal incident there, you could tune in when they're talking about that infrastructure review to sort of hold our state government to account. Another example, I don't see Diana Conway on, but tell her I talked about this. Artificial turf is something that we've heard a lot about from our constituents over the years as an issue of concern, and for the first time, we were able to pass legislation on this at the state level. There's an interest in figuring out how we dispose of artificial turf when it's done. The great thing about natural turf is that we don't need to dispose of it. It's biodegradable. It's grass, right? There's lots of ways to deal with excess grass. Artificial turf, oh my gosh, Diana Conway is logging on right now as if on cue. It's actually heard me start talking about artificial turf and logged in. So I will have to roll back since she's here. Diana, I was just talking about artificial turf and our success in an artificial turf law for the first time in our history. There's an interest in figuring out how we dispose of artificial turf once we're done with it. And so we were able to put in place a law to actually study that and come up with best practices for dealing with that. Again, something I've heard a lot about from our constituents over the years. So that's what I tried to do with this role. I tried to make sure that we were keeping an eye out for District 16 on all the pieces of legislation that came before the committee that Delegate Love and I serve on. And then, of course, most significantly, and Delegate Wolek might talk more about this, but we dealt with a lot of transportation budget issues this year. A lot of that ended up going through Delegate Wolek's committee, but the bills were originally before the committee that Delegate Love and I serve on. Actually, Delegate Love chairs the subcommittee that dealt with many of the proposals to figure out how to fill our transportation funding gap. What was most important, I think, is what we were going to use that revenue for. And one of the big things we were able to do was make sure that the metro system was prioritized. And I know many of you are sick of hearing me say this, but the metro is really important whether you ride it or not. You don't want everybody who gets on the Metro every day in District 16 being that car in front of you on the roadway. Obviously, it's good for the environment to have a functioning Metro system, and it's really important for our economic growth. If you look at the economic focal points of the county, they are the Metro centers, right? They are downtown Bethesda, Friendship Heights, now North Bethesda. And so it's really important we support that. Metro was facing a fiscal cliff, mostly due to COVID-19, both the drying up of federal funds, but also because they had given money back to Maryland and Virginia and DC in the early days of COVID, and that affected their funding formula. And so their funding formula was sort of short of where it needed to be because of some technical issues when they returned some money to the jurisdiction. So we were able to sort of fix that technical problem in a bill of mine, but then most importantly, working with our partners on the Appropriations Committee and those people over in the state Senate, we were able to make sure that the Metro was prioritized for funding, as well as a lot of other important programs, including what's called Highway User Revenue, which is transportation nerd talk for giving some state transportation money to the local governments to do things like filling potholes, which is obviously really important. So again, Delegate Wolek might talk about that sort of broader budget picture, but we made sure from our perch in the Environment and Transportation Committee that District 16 and its needs were being taken care of. So with that, let me turn it over to Delegate Love. This is normally where I say nice things about her, but I already got that at the top. So let me just say, it pains me in some ways to say this last time I'll introduce Delegate Love, but I feel really great knowing the next time we do this, she'll be handing it off to me as our state senator. So with that, Delegate Love, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. It's wonderful to see all these friendly faces. I have to say that this last session with Marc as chair of Environment and Transportation was fantastic. He was everything that, this is the part he's going to hate. He was everything that we have known to come to know and love about Marc, that he is well prepared. He knows all of the topics and he is there to help, and he does it with humility and grace. You know, he mentioned Delegate Polakovich-Carr's bill, and this is indicative of the way Marc worked with so many bills. A delegate would come in with a good idea, but it wasn't quite feasible. So he would come up with a way to make it feasible, to make it work, as he said with that bill, to give it teeth. And not only did he come up with that idea, but then he would talk to other people and he would go across and he would work with the Senate and he would do what needed to be done to get that bill across the finish line. So it was just an honor and a pleasure to work with him this last session. And I am thrilled that he is in this role. As Marc said, finally, I think you all are probably very sick of me talking about privacy, but we got the Maryland Online Data Privacy Bill across the finish line. This was a labor of love for me, I have to tell you, having worked on this for many, many years. And I'm really excited because a number of press outlets have lauded our bill as one of the strongest in the nation, as a potential third model that other states could look at. And in fact, Vermont took a lot of our language and took it a step further. And they were able to do so because we had passed such a strong bill. So I'm really excited. Hang on one sec. My thing thinks I want to speak in Spanish. So there we go. So I was really excited about that. So you all will remember that I've talked about privacy, PFAS, and plastics. That last one, no more, privacy, PFAS, and the environment, although I'm not done with plastics. So we got the privacy bill across the finish line. You'll remember that that protects your online data. So when you use an app or you visit different websites, they are collecting information from you all the time. And the example that I like to use is I play solitaire on my phone. There's no reason that that solitaire app should be collecting anything other than what it takes to let me play that game. It should not be gathering my location. It should not be gathering my contacts or anything else related to me. So one of the strongest pieces of that bill was the data minimization piece that says that whoever that they're called controllers, but basically whoever's providing that service can only collect the data that is reasonably related to providing you that service. So really excited about that. Had another bill on PFAS. You'll remember the forever chemical that's in a lot of nonstick items. We passed legislation a couple years ago to ban it from firefighting foam, food packaging, rugs and carpets. This year, we tried to look a little bit higher up the chain. Where is it coming from? Who's using it? Why are they using it? Can they use something else? So I was proud to sponsor, and we passed legislation that works with MDE to go after those actual users of PFAS to try to stop it before it hits our environment and our waterways. Speaking of waterways, I had two pieces of legislation that I'm very excited about dealing with our waterways. One was called the Clean Water Justice Act. And in short, what it does is roll back, or not roll back, but to fill in a gap where the Supreme Court rolled back the federal Clean Water Act protections. And it allows individuals and groups to sue to make sure that our waterways are clean. And another one is the Whole Watershed Act. And this was a really fun bill. It was a big bill that our chair very deftly handled and helped me get across the finish line to take a broader view of how we do sort of what I call random acts of restoration. So rather than doing sort of stream restoration here and some stormwater work there and some tree planting there, take a chunk of the watershed, a smaller area, think Little Falls watershed in our district, and plan a number of actions in that area, and then have a state team and a local team, so nonprofits, property owners, the local government, work together to get those actions in the ground in a coordinated attempt, and to make the permitting and financing process cleaner and easier. So really excited about that innovative piece. And then the last one I wanted to mention, because it really hits close to home. Many of you may remember Sara Langenkamp, and she was riding on River Road in the bike lane, coming home from her children's elementary school, and she was hit by a truck and she was killed. The family, not only dealing with the devastation of the loss of a wife and a mother, had to then sit there as the driver of that truck was sentenced to a fine and community service. And that was it, because that was the most that he could get under the law. So then Senator Kelly and I, and under the leadership of Chair Korman, passed the Sara Langenkamp Memorial Act that gives prosecutors another tool, so they're able to have someone be put in jail for up to 2 months for that act. So I was really honored to work on that bill with Dan Langenkamp. And with that, lots more I could talk about, but don't want to talk your ear off tonight. Look forward to Q&A. I will pass it off to Delegate Wolek, who, as Chair Korman mentioned, just had a stellar first year. I remember that my first year, I had 2 bills passed and I was thrilled. Delegate Wolek really worked hard, figured out what works for her, worked with people, did an amazing job in getting some legislation across the finish line, as well as really settle herself into the appropriations team. So Delegate Wolek, take it away.
Thank you, Delegate Love. Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you after a very busy session. And I know it's been a bit since we ended, but it's fantastic to join you in this conversation. Thanks also to Delegate Love and Delegate Korman for this past year and their support as I've come up to speed. There is still a lot to learn, but I feel like I'm finally getting, my footing. I was just really excited to get a year under my belt and go through the whole cycle, serving as your delegate, and excited to be on the other side of that personally. So I'll talk a little bit about, just the year, but I want to start off by discussing both the legislation that I was able to bring forward, highlight a few others that I was excited to support, and talk a little bit about the budget. And then, of course, we'll shift into the Q&A. So my particular approach, I'm serving on the Appropriations Committee, covering education, and my subcommittee is Education and Economic Development. My background is pretty wide when it comes to policy, but over the last 7 years, as a professor at University of Maryland, my focus had been around well-being and flourishing. And so the perspective that I'm bringing into the policy space is really around how do we help people live fuller, richer, better lives. And so the policies, the bills that I brought forward are really centered around the human experience. It's just how I, would like to sort of explain the big sort of umbrella of my work. So the first one I'd like to talk about is a bill that was focused on financial well-being of young adults, essentially. I think that having young adults just have the skills to manage their money is fundamental for living well later on, being able to purchase a home. We talked about housing, being able to plan for retirement, being able to support children and families, and all the things that you need to be able to do with financial well-being. The challenge is in our state, we don't actually have across the board financial education provided to young people in K through 12. So what ends up happening is, if you go to college, you're coming in with a hodgepodge of experience. You may have had zero financial education, or you may have had some. All that to say is once you get into college, you're taking on student loans, you're making financial choices. Maybe you're even being presented with credit cards that you now have to manage. All that without any education or support oftentimes. What colleges have provided historically are financial aid counselors that help with managing of student loans, but really not much support beyond that. And so this particular bill, House Bill 811, the idea was to pilot a financial well-being coach position at 2 higher education institutions over the course of the next 2 years. And then hopefully learn from that pilot and then maybe make that position available in colleges throughout our state. So I was really excited to have that bill gain support both in my committee and then make its way through and get passed and signed into law. So I have some more interest in this space. I hope to come back to it after these 2 years are done as we look at the pilot and learn from it. The second one is also in the higher education space, specifically though, focused on individuals with disabilities. As you know, senators and delegates, we have a pot of money that we give away every year for individuals seeking to go to, school here in our state. So if you're studying in the state of Maryland, pursuing either a community college or college or university, we have scholarships to give. The challenge has been, we actually had a constituent reach out and say that I have a disability and I cannot take the minimum of 6 credits that are required in order to be eligible for your scholarship. And so, we thought through how to address this issue and came up with the idea that we could create a waiver program in partnership with the Maryland Higher Education Commission and allow people who want to seek our scholarships to request a waiver from the 6 credit minimum. And then once they get that, they can apply for these scholarships. So this was cross-filed by Senator Zucker and the Senate side, and again, got support, and we were able to pass that. The third bill I wanted to talk about is called the Miriam Kelty Aging and Senior Social Connection Bill. This is directed towards the senior population and aging in place and aging in your community. So now there are many different ways to live in that time in your life. You can choose to stay in your home, you can choose some other options, but all of those options should be readily accessible, and we need to be thinking creatively and with some focus on addressing aging. Because we have many people aging and we need all solutions. So the villages are really I think a beautiful solution for one of the solutions to stay in your community. The challenge is, though, that individuals who've been running villages are themselves having challenge sort of maintaining it. Sustaining a village is an issue because some of these villages have been running now for 20 years, and people who started them sometimes are no longer able to run them. And so they got together to think about, how do we keep these villages going, even when we may not be able to continue running them? And one of the ideas it came up with is to form a consortium of villages in Montgomery County. So there are 7 villages. A couple of them are actually in our district, and they are trying to centralize their administrative tasks, and then in the consortium, and then freeing up the villages to actually help the seniors who are aging in place. For that particular bill, I was able to secure some funding for this consortium to pilot this new model. And we were able to get about $240,000 for them over the course of the next 3 years. And the hope is that we learn from this consortium model so that the Department of Aging may be able to take those learnings, both for their in-house policy development, but then also to model for villages across our state. I'm really, really excited about this because I think villages not only provide you with services, and it's really volunteer-led, where a neighbor is helping another neighbor, but it's also about social connection and getting out of your home and meeting your community members, meeting your neighbors. It just brings a lot of joy and connection, and I personally think connection is fundamental to a lot of things that we need in our communities and in our country. And social connection is something that I hope to continue to work on in every session in some fashion. And so the last one bill I'll talk about is about it's House Bill 1013. And this particular one is for state employees. If you are a state employee and you wanted to take paid leave, but you couldn't for mental health, this bill makes that possible. And I'm not going to go too much into it other than that. There were a couple bills that didn't get through this session, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But I did want to just mention that I had a bill on outdoor and outdoor learning, green schools for children. But I have a part of the challenge in that for this session was a lot of people I found that needed to be educated about what green schools were, what their benefits were. And very recently, the governor just has put out an executive order on outdoor learning. So I think it bodes really well for bringing some version of a green school bill forward next session. Because as I think about my work, children are people I want to prioritize, young adults, seniors, and individuals with disabilities. And I was disappointed that this didn't make it, but I'm heartened that I think next session I'll have hopefully some success on that. So those were some bills that I'd worked on. I do want to talk a little bit about the budget, but I feel like I've been going on already for a bit. So do we want to pause here and then maybe get to the budget in our questions? I'm going to ask my teammates how to handle that.
Sure, that's fine. We have a couple of questions. I also just want to lift up Dr. Rockhauer wrote some nice comments about Senator Kelly's work on healthcare over the years, and it's true. She's been a great champion of healthcare. Actually, my aide and I were lamenting that we don't have like our go-to healthcare person right now for constituent service issues related to healthcare. And of course, we work through these as a team, and we'll figure it out for our constituents. But it was really nice having Ariana's passion and expertise. Of course, we're going to have a new delegate in a couple of months here, and we don't know what committee that person will be on, what expertise they'll bring. We know they'll be a great addition to the team. The first question I got was related to medical aid in dying, sometimes called Death with Dignity or the End of Life Options Act. And the questioner, I'll read the question, asking what happened to it. They're concerned to hear an elected official in a proceeding express respect for other officials' religious beliefs, which would be fine if this was not a state action in a state hearing. And they're concerned because it seems like there's a tacit acceptance of officials voting based upon their religious beliefs. So yes, the medical aid in dying bill has been around for quite a while. The House has previously voted on it, I believe in 2019, but it might have been in 2018, but Delegate Love is nodding, which suggests to me she was with us. It was 2019, and it passed the House. And the view since then has been that the votes are there in the House to pass it again, but the votes have not been there in the state Senate. And a little bit frustrating this year because before the session began, the Senate president expressed great confidence that it was going to be in a position to pass the Senate this year. And then it wasn't even brought up for a vote. And it wasn't brought up for a vote for the very simple reason that the Senate president's initial count was off and they didn't have the votes in the Senate to actually pass it. And so, we'll continue, I think, to look to the Senate to, start the process again, because the view again is that the votes are there in the House. I do think that people's religious and cultural views are clearly influencing their votes on this, as they do on many issues. People's values are drawn from different places in different ways. For some people, it's cultural. For some people, it's religious, community-based, whatever it is. That is what drives each of our decision-making in different ways. And yes, there's clearly a subset of members who feel that either their religious or cultural beliefs sort of work against having this policy. This is interesting because it's actually not really a party line bill. One of the top promoters in the state Senate is a Republican, and we had Republican votes for it in the House when we voted in favor of it a few years ago. So it's challenging. I am very happy to co-sponsor this bill as I did this year, and I hope to vote for it again. I don't know if Delegates Love and Wolek want to speak to it as well.
You covered it, Mr. Chair. I also was a co-sponsor. I support it. Talked to a lot of you about it. It was, as the chair said, very frustrating. I think there also were some folks in the Senate who had initially said to the Senate president that they were comfortable with it, and then they got into it and they were not, which is very frustrating. And in 2019, I was there for that and voted for it on the House floor. And it was stunning to me because when you're on the floor in the House and the Senate, you are supposed to vote. That is the rule. You're in your seat, you're supposed to vote. And it came down to a tie in the Senate because one senator sat on his hands and didn't vote. So that's why the bill died in 2019. So hopefully over the interim, those folks that weren't supportive of it can be swayed by their constituents and that we can bring it back up for a vote in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I am also supportive of this, and I'm hopeful that, we are going to be able to move it forward. What is that? Sorry. My phone started talking as well. In any case, yes. So I'll just say that there were some conversations with individuals who didn't actually support this bill that I found very, very helpful, because I think some of the concerns that they raised were actually addressed eventually in the proposal that was moving forward. So I think, yes, there are opinions across the spectrum on this issue, like any other issue. But in conversation, I think we were working to listen to everybody, but then some of the thoughts and questions that were raised were important to make the bill that was being put forward stronger. And those ideas were being taken from across the spectrum of opinion. And I hope that, again, moving forward, it finds traction.
So the next question is, what are our top goals for the next legislative session? Why don't we go in reverse order and start with Delegate Wolek?
Thank you. So I mentioned the Green Schools Bill. I hope to bring that forward as well again. I will have some bills around higher education and transparency, sort of linking outcomes with what you're studying and how much things cost. And making that transparent so that young people can make decisions based on more information. I also will be looking at information around well-being and making that more public when it comes to the higher education space. I think there's some movement in well-being and measuring that in K through 12, but not so much traction within higher education. So there'll be a bill around that. And there certainly will be something around social connection, again, moving forward, as I alluded to earlier. What that looks like, I'm not sure yet. So myself and my team, are going to start exploring a set of ideas around this summer. I do want to do something around contemplation and mindfulness and thinking through how to fold that in to either the K through 12 experience, either through teacher training or maybe looking at that from a criminal justice lens, and providing that sort of training in rehabilitation. And so we're still sort of in the exploring stage, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor in terms of what's on my mind.
So right now my legislative agenda is pretty thin. I don't know what the fall and the next January are going to bring for me. So just sort of waiting to see how things roll out. I often get ideas from my constituents as I'm out meeting them during the summer and the fall. So I'm looking forward to that. And usually advocacy groups start approaching me in the fall. So I am sure that will happen. The one bill that didn't make it across the finish line, I hope to bring back, Mr. Chair, hint, hint. So in Maryland, we have an increasing number of automated traffic enforcement systems. Think cameras. So speed cameras, red light cameras, bus cameras. We now have noise cameras. We've got cameras in work zones. We've got cameras in school zones. What we don't have is a single set of rules. Who gets access to that data? How long is it kept? When is it, how is it kept? When is it destroyed? So I had a bill this year that we were able to get out of the House, and then it ran into some challenges in the Senate. So I intend to bring that back, and hopefully we can set up these parameters for more data privacy. But I'm looking forward to learning a lot and figuring out what that agenda is going to look like next year. Mr. Chair?
So for me, there's a lot of bills sort of in the committee that didn't get done that I'm sort of interested in trying to get across the finish line. One in particular I know Delegate Love will care about is we had a good piece of legislation from one of our Baltimore County colleagues on single-use plastic water bottles and trying to reduce their usage and also get a better handle on how much individual water bottles we are purchasing. But the big issue that I personally care a lot about and I know is important to my sort of committee work is implementation of the Climate Solutions Now Act. We passed a really far-reaching landmark piece of legislation 2 years ago that sets us on a course to be a net zero greenhouse gas emitting state by 2045. And that was the easy part. And I kind of wish I was chair when we were setting the goal, not when we had to take all the steps to meet the goal, because we got a lot of work to do. And figuring out how we're actually going to meet that goal is really the work of the next few years. The Moore administration has identified a need of about $1 billion a year for implementation, which I probably think understates how much is needed. And what's that money for? That's like to help buildings transition to non-greenhouse gas energy sources, for example, or increasing our incentives to transition people to zero emission vehicles in line with a piece of legislation Delegate Love sponsored to require us to shift to more zero emission vehicles. And so figuring out how we're going to do that is a big part of what we need to do over the next few years. We know the goal, we have the goal, we know kind of the basic building blocks, but there's a lot of sort of meat we need to put on the bones, and that will be a lot of next year and the years after for me. The next question is about civics education and whether the legislature might consider mandating civics education or working on that. I don't know if either of my colleagues wants to take that while they're thinking that over. I will just give you a little bit of a wonky process answer, which is we basically never pass curriculum mandates through the legislature. We leave that to the State Board of Education, of course, working with our local boards. And this can cause us all, frankly, great consternation, because there's a lot of things that people would like us to mandate. For example, legislation to require Holocaust education, legislation to require financial literacy education, legislation to require more diverse history. And a lot of these topics are of particular interest to me, including civics education, but we generally do not pass sort of specific curriculum bills. One thing we did do this year that somewhat gets around this in some areas is we passed some teacher training requirements. So for example, instead of requiring curriculum teaching about anti-Semitism, obviously a really important issue right now, we require teacher training related to anti-Semitism so it can sort of seep into the classroom. But generally, we sort of organize through the State Board of Education. We have ideas for curriculum changes. I don't know if either Delegate Sara, either Delegate Sarah's, excuse me, either Sara would like to add anything.
No, just that I would love it if we had civics education. I think it is something that is needed, but as the chair said, you know, generally not something that we pass.
Delegate Wolek?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think, but I'd love to sort of think on that and see. We can't come at it from the curriculum perspective, just as Delegate Korman was just speaking to. Teacher training is another vehicle to try to address it, but it's a great question to chew on and sort of think about. You know, how might we kind of get to that? I know in the higher education space, there is less of this constraint. So that might be a place to start with civic education. But I'd love to think about it some more. So thank you for raising it.
Great. So the next question, actually from our chair of our County Board of Elections, relates to our voting. District 16 voters requested in return more mail-in ballots than any other legislative district in the state. Any theories as to why? I don't know if either of my colleagues has a theory other than we're the best educated and most engaged district in the state. So it stands to reason we would have the best participation. We're going with that? Okay.
Yeah, we're going with that. I don't know. I could surmise that, you know, since we're very politically active, a lot of folks were out, you know, voting and working and getting other folks to vote, but I don't know. It's a great question.
The next question I would say is pretty directed to me, and it is the budget deal that Delegate Wolek can talk more about included a surcharge of about $1 per ride on ride-sharing services. Ride-share services allow people to live near and or use mass transit when possible, while using ride-share and need to go somewhere not served by mass transit. In effect, the budget raised taxes on people who choose not to own cars or are unable to drive. What's the policy rationale for targeting this particular population, particularly instead of the usage-based fees that have historically been used in transportation policy? So we did add, as part of our sort of overall transportation pie, a 50-cent statewide surcharge or fee on Uber or Lyft rides, sometimes called ride sharing. It's really ride hailing because most of the time you're not sharing the ride. In fact, if you are sharing the ride, it's only 25 cents. So if you're splitting a ride with someone through the app, right, not just getting in with your friend, but if you're actually using the app to do a true ride share, there's actually a discount. There's also a discount if the vehicle you're in is a zero emission vehicle. There's already a 25-cent fee in Montgomery County and some of our other large counties that has been around for about 10 years. So this would be in addition to that to help fund our transportation needs. The policy rationale is, yes, it is true. There are some people who choose to go carless who then make great use of ride hail, but I would be surprised if the stats bear out that most people using ride hail are in that camp. I think people tend to use it in addition to owning vehicles, not as a substitute for owning vehicles. But the rationale is there's a lot of wear and tear on our roads from these ride hail vehicles because they spend a lot of time just driving around without people in them, going from place to place, waiting for the app to ring them up. And so we looked at what other states are doing to fund their transportation policy. And this is becoming a very popular way of doing so. We particularly followed Colorado's model on this, but a number of other states, including the District of Columbia, have sort of a statewide fee for Uber and Lyft rides that they use to fund their transportation needs. It's not perfect, but frankly, there is no perfect way to fund anything. Any tax, fee, surcharge we do, there are some externalities too that are not ideal. But overall, this seemed to make sense and is something a lot of states are doing with their transportation policy. And let me just give Delegate Wolek the chance now to talk a little bit about the overall budget situation, since this is related to that topic. Delegate Wolek.
Thank you, Delegate Korman. So as you are all pretty plugged in, and so you probably were following as we were going into session, we were coming in with a huge budget shortfall, set of priorities and commitments that we had already had made, in prior sessions. And so going into it, we had quite the challenge to figure out how we were going to meet the needs that we had identified. And that the three that were a big priority this session were the blueprint, of course, funding that, as well as transportation for all the reasons that Delegate Korman had spoken about, and then finally trauma funding for our hospital systems. And so and then a little ways into the session, we also had a write-down come in, which essentially meant that we had an even bigger hole to fill. As a freshman delegate, I wasn't part of the high-level conversations, which Delegate Korman can talk more about as to how some of those deals were made, but I can speak to the areas that we were able to address. So we found we essentially used tobacco tax revenue to fund the blueprint, and the whole state support for public schools is about $9.1 billion. The transportation fiscal year 25 budget had about $330 million in revenue to support the transportation system. And then for the trauma funding services, we had about $105 million in addition to address the trauma centers across our state so that they're able to stay state of the art and provide the care to approximately 25,000 people that use them on a yearly basis. A few other areas that we were able to support were childcare scholarships, and those are essentially monies that parents can use to put their children into daycare so that they can work. And this was coming into the session. We had received a proposal from the governor, which was actually going to increase the amount of monies that families would or actually decrease the scholarship and thereby increase the amount of money that families would have to pay. We were very excited as a legislature to be able to not have to do that and not actually increase those costs for for families that are using this care. So that was, I think, a big success, as well as the support that we were able to provide community colleges. Again, coming into the session, community colleges had received a large cut, and we were able to decrease that as well. The capital budget overall, we had about 917 million for school construction, about 600 million for housing and community development, $594 million for environmental programs, and about 382 million for higher education. One shout out I also want to give to Delegate Shetty from District 18 is on House Bill 666. We used to get a chuckle every time that number came up, but essentially it was a SNAP bill. There are many delegates that came into the session wanting to provide more funds into SNAP, and this particular bill sort of took from the different proposals, and we were able to increase the SNAP allotment to about $95 a month, which was again a big success. So that's a very broad brushstroke overview of where we are, where we ended up with the budget. And personally, I can say that my first session, I was very much focused on learning the process of bill work and getting a bill passed. And going into the second session, I want to continue to get smarter on the budget side. So I'll hopefully have more to share with you as I do that.
Great, thank you, Delegate Wolek. The next question is how to make input to the legislative process more accessible to residents. For example, for input on budget issues, there's 24-hour notice to provide testimony. This requires continual checking, and then after the budget vote, I couldn't find any updates. It doesn't seem easy to get information. The message feels like the process doesn't encourage resident participation. So I'll talk about this broadly because I do think there's been a lot of improvement over the past few years. And in a lot of ways, it's a silver lining of COVID, actually, because COVID required us to do a lot of things remotely. We streamed a lot more things than we ever had before. Before COVID, we were piloting stream video of the House floor a few days a session. Then that became, permanent. Every session we're in on the floor is now web streamed, and you can, watch us in real time. Subcommittee work sessions used to not be streamed, and now they are. Committee voting sessions used to not be streamed, and now they are. So there's been a lot of improvement there. And we also take virtual testimony in addition to in-person testimony, which is great for people who can't, get to Annapolis in the middle of the day. So that's the good news. I would say the bad news is, particularly around it's kind of hard to weigh in. A lot of things happen very quickly with the budget, and it's just not conducive and each step of the process to resident engagement. I think up front it is, right? When the budget comes in, we treat it like a normal bill, and there are hearings, and anybody can testify on those. I would say we don't get a lot of public testimony historically on sections of the budget, but it is open like any other piece of legislation to public testimony. On the other hand, something that does now get streamed, which didn't used to, and so is available for the public to see, are the conference committees of the budget. The budget's the one bill that basically has a conference committee every year where the House and the Senate get together to negotiate differences, and those used to not be available for public consumption, and now they are, and so that's something of a positive. But there's definitely more to do on that front. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add to that. Okay.
Sure. Sorry. Not with respect to the budget, but in terms of testifying on legislation overall and giving your input to legislation overall. As the chair said, we've done a lot of work, a lot of it led by him, in fact, to try to make it more accessible for people. And I think one of the big things, as he said, was the ability to testify virtually. And I think that is really, really helpful. It can be incredibly frustrating because, people don't know when bills are going to be called. And for legislators as well, sometimes you only get a couple days notice. And so that can be really tough. But I would recommend trying to keep in touch with us, and we will help you as much as possible, as much as we know about when things are coming up. But yeah, unfortunately, it can be a really tight timeline, and that can be tough. And it's not to keep people's voices out or to keep people out of the process. It's just managing so many bills and the schedule. I mean, Mr. Chair, how many bills did we have in ENT this session?
350 House bills. I don't remember how many with the Senate bills, so a lot.
Yeah. So trying to schedule that and keep on top of everything is just really, really tough. So we're trying. If you have suggestions, we're certainly all ears.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, and I think the other delegates agree with me, like, I love when District 16 people are involved in the legislative process. First of all, Delegate Love mentioned she gets a lot of her ideas from constituents, so do I, especially going door to door, you get a lot of great ideas that way. But like when there's a bill hearing and I suddenly see one of you, and this is a very plugged in group, so I do see some of you particularly, specifically testifying on the bill, or we have the doctor of the day and it's Dr. Rockhour, like, that's great. Like, I love that. So I want more involvement. I love when people ask me, respond to my weekly email with really specific questions that show that they actually care about the details. So at least I think, speaking for the three of us, like, we're not trying to keep anybody out. We want you all actually probably more involved than you are. And please tell your friends that, like, one, Annapolis isn't that far away, but two, with all the virtual options, there's lots of ways to be involved. The next question was about the Office of People's Counsel. In particular, where there was a local piece of legislation on a county office that exists but has not been funded since the Great Recession, which is called the Office of People's Counsel, which is to provide kind of a public advocate on issues before the Park and Planning Commission, the Planning Board in particular. There was local legislation from Senator Ben Cramer to sort of have the state mandate the county fund this position, and that bill did not advance. The version of it that we passed through our county delegation, the 26 Montgomery County House members, was a heavily revised bill to try to address various concerns people raised. Unfortunately, sometimes compromise is great, right? And you satisfy a lot of people. In this case, we actually ended up satisfying nobody. And so when the bill got to the standing committee, we just didn't take it up because there was really no advocate for this amended piece of legislation. I'll just say there are a few different concerns people have. First of all, some of my colleagues don't want an Office of People's Counsel. They don't see the utility of it. Others are concerned about setting the precedent of us kind of line item budgeting the county council. And that's a concern that I actually share. I think we need to be thoughtful when we do things like that, because there's a lot of things I'd love to see the county council do. I made a pretty affirmative decision 6 years ago not to run for county council. And so I don't want to, I don't want to be in the business of trying to be a county council member from the state legislature. And then the third thing is, I think a lot of people, and I think most of my colleagues are in this camp, support the idea of a people's council, would like to see the county council fund it, but maybe have a slightly different idea than others about what its specific role should be. Whether it should be a true advocate that takes a position before the planning board and before courts on particular issues, or more of an information ombudsman type role, providing information to people, showing them how to navigate the process, giving them the tools to navigate the process, as opposed to taking an active role themselves. And so there's a lot to discuss over that. And I know the county council and the county executive continue to sort of negotiate over that as well. And again, my hope is that that's an issue that's addressed in Rockville rather than Annapolis. I don't know if either of the other delegates have any thoughts on the issue. Okay.
I'll just say that I think the fact that this was discussed both in our county delegation and then brought to the House, it has put this issue and its importance and its different perspectives on the radar. So even though it was not successful, I think it brought forward the whole spectrum of thought on this particular issue, as well as the different possible paths forward. So there was progress because at least that happened. And also it was raised, the county council members are aware that, we were looking at this. And I think this puts it on their radar as well. So for those who are advocating for it, I don't think it was a total loss. And again, those who were opposed to it were able to share their views. So the conversation certainly moved forward, even though we don't have, a bill to demonstrate that. I think again, there hopefully will be a positive result because of it.
So another question is about the latest on Little Falls Parkway. So as some of you know, Little Falls Parkway has gone through various formations over the past few years. The kind of final decision that the county council ultimately voted on maintains the road diet on the kind of big block where the trail crossing is and the next block over, but it's going to do it in a different configuration than what we have now. It's going to be one lane on each side of the green strip median, whereas right now it's all on one side of what used to be the green strip median. One lane in each direction will be on each side of the green strip median. At the trail crossing, this is being considered a permanent change, and the pavement will be removed, and they will start thinking about what the future state of that in terms of green space might be. The other block, they are putting the lanes on either side, one lane in each direction, but they are not yet ripping up the pavement because they want to consider what sort of the long-term plan there is as well. I would say that this is one of those compromises where it satisfies a lot of the concerns, not every concern, but a lot of concerns that people had, and it certainly maintains the safety of the road diet at the trail crossing, which I personally think is very, very important, while trying to help vehicle traffic move through there a little bit better. So I think a mostly positive outcome, and I know there's a lot of engagement right now between the Parks Department and the local communities about kind of what this is going to look like as they move forward. And they're also going through the process they have to go through to get, there's a federal sign off they need to get because of how the money that was used to originally acquire the parkland. That process is going on as well. I do not see any other questions, so I do want to give my colleagues a chance for any closing comments, but I'll just start by saying, really appreciate everyone's engagement. Lots of things you could be doing between 6:30 and 7:33 on a Sunday evening. So I'm happy you were able to share some of this time with us, because as I said earlier, we really do want your involvement and engagement, and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, because when I go door to door in District 16, I am way more likely to hear about the latest federal government shutdown or a U.S. House race in Montana than I am anything in state government. And I would love to hear more about people's concerns about the state and local issues. So please spread the word. Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ditto. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. It's always wonderful to see you. Appreciate your participation. Like the chair said, tell your friends, because I have actually heard from folks that they don't know what we do at the state level. And it's great to talk to them one-on-one at the doors, but I want to make sure that more and more people are engaged. I also posted in the chat. We've got our two wonderful Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee members on here, and just give a little plug for them. We need more precinct volunteers. So if you find yourself with an excess of time, these two lovely folks would love to talk to you. So thanks again for everything, and please reach out if you have any questions. Delegate Wolek.
Thank you. I'll echo that, and thank you for being with us this evening. It was just wonderful to connect with you and talk a little bit about what we accomplished individually as a team, and as the broader team, and in the assembly as well. The discussion on civic education, the three of us made it out to an D16 elementary school recently, and we were talking to fourth graders about what it is that we do. And then they had a trip planned where they went to Annapolis and got to see, the whole space. So if there are opportunities like that where we can get out in the community, talk to children, talk to young people, let us know. We're very excited to do that. I hope I can say that and on behalf of our team. And then also I'd love to come out and, the issue of civic education, it's not just for children and young adults, it's also for working adults. And many of our friends and neighbors, obviously not this group, are unaware of, as a Delegate Love was saying, what we do, but then also how it's done, the whole process of the work in Annapolis. And so if you would like for me to come out into your neighborhood and just have that discussion, keep in mind I was a professor for 7 years. I love to teach. I can come and do a quick and dirty session on, hey, how what happens in Annapolis. So just throwing that out there for you to consider, but really wanting to continue working on your behalf. So please stay in touch. I've put my contact details, in the chat. If you have bill ideas or other issues you want us to champion, please reach out to me. I'm very excited to be able to do that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Good night.